We ready? Hi again and welcome. You've made it to part 8 of this beginner's guide to music direction in musical theatre. Now, in the previous video, we looked at selecting your band and orchestra when sometimes you're on a budget. But in this video, we're now going to be looking at the band call itself and working with your band and orchestra on what needs to be decided and what you need to be prepared for. So if you haven't already subscribed, please hit the button below so you can be informed when further videos are released. And please continue to ask me any questions in the comments box. And let me know if there's any other subjects you'd like me to cover. Okay, my name is Rob Parrish. Let's make a start. So we've now got to the point when the decisions on the instrumentation have been made and everyone seems to be more excited than yourself that we've reached the stage where we're going to hear the band or the orchestra for the first time. Now, you've no time to be excited. You've got a lot on your mind, or you should have, and a lot to remember. If there's any rehearsal in the entire process where the music director is going to feel some stress, this is the one. Despite the excitement from your company, we need to remember that this is a rehearsal for you and the band and not the company. Now, of course, it's useful for the entire company to hear how the band or orchestra will sound, and I would encourage all actors and the company as a whole to be present at this rehearsal. Even your sound technician too, if possible. But given the time constraints usually associated at this point in the process, this may be the only opportunity you have to work with the band or orchestra, and therefore vital that you use this time to concentrate purely on the sound of your musicians. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's take a look at some of the things you will need to have arranged prior to this rehearsal. Number 1, should you invite the company at all? There was a time when I felt that I only required soloists to attend this rehearsal, but over time I've realised that everyone involved in the production can benefit from hearing how all our hard work will sound. So in answer to this question, I would say yes, as long as the company is very clear that this is a rehearsal for you and your band and not themselves. It may seem insignificant and many musicians will have their own music stands, but if you are not taking the rehearsal in the venue, remember to inform all musicians that they may need to bring such a stand, unless of course you or the group are going to be providing them. It's also a good idea maybe to try and arrange a small PA system for your principal singers primarily. Suddenly being faced with a band could result in less experienced actors over singing. Then, many musicians in amateur theatre are more than capable of sight reading the vast majority of known musicals available. However, some may request some advanced sight of their part, which I don't believe is unreasonable. When it comes to arranging the position of the musicians in the pit, a lot of this will be dictated by the musical itself. If the musical, for instance, is very reliant on a strong rhythm section, for instance, rock musicals or musicals involving modern rhythmical backings, it would be advantageous to have that rhythm section, as they call it, towards the centre of the pit. Particularly ensure the bass and drums are together. They like to groove. However, a more traditional layout may be better suited if the orchestration is more of a traditional nature, with strings on the conductor's left, woodwind in front and brass and percussion perhaps to the conductor's right. But either way, make sure you give this some thought in advance. Many musicals have what's known as a playout written. It would be useful to have decided whether or not this is going to be used prior to this rehearsal. Now, I discussed in a previous video about marking up the score to ensure consistency throughout rehearsals. This practice comes into its own even more now we have an orchestra in front of us. Before rehearsing each musical number, explain to the band how you will beat any section that may be deemed as slightly awkward. Don't take it for granted that your musicians will automatically know whether you are beating the number in 4 or in 2, for example. If you feel there may be confusion in certain parts of the number that frequently change tempo, for instance, it's worth explaining how you will conduct each of such passages. This is your opportunity to explain to fellow musicians any musical cuts that may have been made. Sometimes such information is sent out by the MD to the musicians in advance. And if you are new to working with the band, always give a count-in. Let me just go through once again what I mean by a count-in. First of all, if you're in front of a conductor ready to play, so as a musician, the conductor is ready and he or she begins. Not very helpful. Why? Because a musician needs two things before they start. They need to know the pulse of the music they're about to play, and they need to know when to start to play. Let me demonstrate that. So a count-in, therefore, will give those two things to the musician, i.e. how quick the music's going to go and when to start. So if we were to start, for instance, on a piece in 4, we'd prepare the orchestra or band, we tell them that I'm going to beat this in 4, that would have been in instructions previously, and then we would start 1, 2, 3, 4 and go. Or if the piece was in 3, we may have 1, 2, 3. So they get the pulse and they know exactly when to start as well. If the piece is much slower, we don't need to give a full bar count in. If it's in 4 and it's relatively slow, we may only do a 3, 4, go. They know when to start and they know the pace of the music before they start to play. We've talked previously about marking up your score, and one of the markings should always be the count-in, to make sure that each time you conduct a particular musical number from the musical, you're going to give the same count-in. Once you've given that instruction to musicians at the band call, they are very likely to write that down. So they're expecting a 3, 4 before they start each time you come to that particular musical number. Let's move on now to cueing in musicians and vocalists. The cueing in is virtually the same whether it's a member of the band or whether it's a vocalist. First and foremost, actually, you're going to look them directly in the eye. So if I have a clarinet player down to my left that's been tacit for the past 52 bars, he's wanting some kind of indication as to exactly when those 52 bars are up and he needs to start playing again. So the music would be going along and I would simply look at them. Same is true of vocalists. And during the rehearsal process, you will have become very aware of where any particular character is on stage. So they may be on stage left or they may be on stage right. You'll know where to cue them from. The music will be going along. Let's say it's in 4 and they're going to come in on the upbeat. Okay, so here it comes. 1, 2, 3. Look at them and go. It's very clear. When starting to play through a number, if something goes wrong or you're aware that any musician or musicians have misunderstood any instructions, stop and correct it then. Don't be tempted to play on regardless in the hope that any problem may correct itself. Now, I want to put a caveat on what I've just said. There needs to be a bit of judgment regarding whether you need to point out that a musician has maybe missed an entry. They're likely to know and feeling bad enough about it already without you pointing it out in front of their colleagues. So just be aware that sometimes you may need to use some diplomatic judgment. As with cueing actors with vocal cues, it can be just as important to cue in musicians at certain points, especially if they've spent some time counting through tacit sections. You may have already indicated such cues in your score, and to be seen to be giving these cues to musicians, whether they need it or not, will give them similar reassurance you are giving to those on stage. As mentioned previously, always cue vocal entries and continue to do so at this rehearsal. It is sometimes necessary to make musical cuts for all manner of reasons. It goes without saying that you need to ensure that they are all musically correct, and this is your opportunity to advise accordingly to your fellow musicians, even though you may have already sent out such instructions. When making any such cuts in the music, please remember to keep these as simple as possible. Think of your fellow musicians that may only have this one rehearsal. I have found that it's always good practice to let musicians mark up their own parts. No matter how thorough you think you may be in marking up a musician's part, they are much more likely to remember exactly what the instruction means if they have indicated such things themselves in the parts they're going to be playing from. Now, I'm often asked on the subject of a DEP, or deputy. What I mean by DEP in this context are musicians that are unable to make all the performances and therefore request to use a deputy for some of the performances. Although this may be seen as inconvenient, if you know the musician and trust his or her judgment, you're likely to be more comfortable with this. If, however, you are using a musician maybe for the first time and they are requesting to use a deputy for one or more performances already, maybe this should be reconsidered. As soon as you have decided upon an instrumentation for a production, and I would advise this as early as possible in the rehearsal process, be sure to confirm all necessary details in writing to all musicians. Dates, times, locations, fees, rehearsal locations, and also remember that for some musicians they need to be informed on what instruments to bring. Read 1 requires flute, B-flat, clarinet and also sax, for instance. Guitar parts may call for an acoustic and an electric. Percussionists particularly need a detailed list of everything required. Make sure you also confirm any dress code and, of course, performance start times. So that brings us to the end of part 8 in this series of videos. Click on the subscribe button below and let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Let me know if you want me to look at any other areas of the role of music director. I look forward to seeing you next time.